That's a great question. So I think probably the thing that stands out most to me, so first, I'm completely impressed by the turnout and grateful to everyone for bringing their ideas and their science and their perspectives to the conversation. And there was a wide range of those perspectives. The other thing that I was not surprised about, but interested to see is the many intersections with artificial intelligence and kind of that space, which we're seeing show up in multiple spaces. So what about you, Josh?
Oh, all of those for sure. And I was really, I've been thinking a lot about Dr. Richard Scheuermann's talk and thinking about new ways, maybe new kinds of literacy as knowledge becomes more computable and moving from the printed word into more graphical representations of knowledge. So I still have pictures in my head of the many lines and circles that he showed, and just had me thinking about new ways in which we interact with data and knowledge as it becomes more computable going into the future, and new ways of being able to kind of new forms of literacy, if you will, and information literacy that I hadn't thought about before as knowledge becomes more computable.
Absolutely. And I think those knowledge graphs, this idea of an integrated knowledge graph, it really does bring everyone to the table, right? So we have kind of these domain specific perspectives, but all of the incredible work that's happened over so many years with respect to knowledge representation, and then being able to integrate these, disparate sources of information together to make this wonderful resource and opportunity to be able to reason in ways that we haven't before. So I agree with you. It was a terrific talk, as was everything yesterday, and I'm really excited to get started on today's program as well.
Yeah, me too. And boy, do we have a great program lined up. Not only fantastic speakers, but I think also I'm really looking forward to opening up the floor with our communities and being able to get direct input from them about our MCBK governance and the activities that go on within our working groups for this coming year.
Absolutely. So I know that we'll be starting our invited keynote here shortly, but shall we go over some housekeeping items, and then I will invite the community if there are questions that you have either about the sessions yesterday, or if you have any points of observation or contemplation that you'd like to share, I'd invite you to add those in the chat and we can address those through the day. And of course, if there are questions about housekeeping items or logistics, please always, we invite you to put those in the chat anytime. So maybe with that, I will would love to actually formally welcome everyone back for day 2 of this first annual MCBK North American chapter meeting. And thanks again to everyone, not only for the terrific presentations and discussions that happened, but I'm really inspired actually by the back and forth and interesting observations that were noted, and look forward to taking those conversations forward together in the program today and far beyond. As a reminder to everyone who's on the call, we are using Zoom for these presentations, for our keynote speeches, as well as other presentations. This is all happening live, so we encourage you to be engaged, participate in this meeting, even though it's a virtual setting. I think what we found yesterday is that this is a great opportunity for active discourse, a terrific chance to be able to engage with folks who you may not typically get to see in your day-to-day work. And so, it's just a tremendous opportunity for sharing and learning. You will, because we are capturing these sessions live, you will be able to access the session recordings on the MCBK website after the meeting. And everyone should have received materials from the meeting. For instance, yesterday's posters were delivered virtually, and all of the connection information as well. So please reach out if you need those materials. And then there will be question and answer sessions for all of the presentations that will be happening, and this will all be mediated through the chat. So please, again, just to really drive this message home, please enter any comments or questions that you have in the chat. Yesterday was actually pretty remarkable. It was really wonderful to see everybody like really jumping in with both feet and having those conversations virtually. So thank you. And you'll see Nor just put a link to the poster and demo abstracts on the website. Check those out if you weren't able to join yesterday. They were pretty tremendous. I'm planning on looking at the knowledge and evidence posters. I wasn't able to catch those. I was in the AI session. And so I'm sure that there will be a lot of that going back and looking at those materials for quite some time to come. So Josh, maybe I'll turn it over to you. I'm not sure if it's too early to get started, but if so, we could always open up the conversation if there are any questions from the audience before we start with our invited keynote.
Yeah, I think we're still a few minutes away, Christy, from Dr. Erin Holvey presenting today's keynote, Mobilizing Computable Biomedical Knowledge for Patient-Centered Comparative Clinical Effectiveness Research, Corey Resources and Opportunities. So I thought maybe, oh, this is great. Thanks, Nora. So we could go through today's agenda just so that we lay out what we have in store for today. I just mentioned Dr. Holvey's keynote presentation today, which was scheduled for just a few minutes from now. And then we'll move on to a presentation and talking about and discussing the challenges and opportunities around publishing computable biomedical knowledge. We'll then be moving on to a presentation around current ongoing work with the computable biomedical knowledge metadata model, and a brief discussion and interactive session around MCBK North American governance. And I think that really kind of tees us up for an afternoon of work group updates and gaining feedback from our members vis-a-vis these specific working group and efforts, and maybe laying out how it is that the community can support one another and MCBK as an organization can promote more effective collaborations in the coming year. As we're waiting, Christy, for Dr. Holvey, I was thinking maybe, and this is just off the cuff, maybe it would be fun to do a chatterfall, which I don't know if people have done these before, but what it is that people enter into the chat, take a second to think about something that stood out for you about yesterday, if you were fortunate enough to attend. And on a count of three, I will hit return, and we can see all of the takeaways, impressions, and feedback kind of in a running line within the chat window.
That is a great idea. I've never participated in something like this before. So not only am I excited to participate, I'm going to take this terrific idea, steal it, and use it somewhere else too. This is wonderful. Thank you.
All right, well, let's give it a shot. This is just us riffing here. So take a second, and for those who were able to attend yesterday, and what was your takeaway? What's in a word or three, the biggest takeaway that you got from yesterday's session and what you appreciated most? And then go ahead and type that in, but don't hit return yet. I'm going to type to three. I'm going to count to three, and on three, hit return. So I'm going to type mine in.
That's great. I took advantage of you speaking because I am such a slow typer. So I'm ready to go whenever you're ready, Josh.
Okay, on a count of three, get ready to hit return, everyone. 1, 2, 3. Oh my gosh, that came fast. Let's
That's
see
terrific.
here. The excitement of AI and LHS, how smart everyone is, particularly humans. I like that. Indeed, there's a heart. Yes, hearing what others are doing in the field. It was a really great array of activities, not only from the speakers, but I really appreciated the demos and the posters. It was a fantastic conversation within the data and evidence group.
Oh, this is really tremendous. I think, when we think, obviously, the MCBK movement and community has been very active on the global level for quite some time. And as we start to think about what this means for all of us here in North America, so the US, but also we think about our friends and colleagues in Canada and in Mexico, how do we engage folks more fully and really have this kind of exchange? Yeah, I'm really encouraged, quite honestly. This is a standing effort and an active conversation that's been happening on the international level. But as we start to think about kind of bringing it home to the regional level where we can maybe engage in person easier at conferences and the ongoing kind of discussions that will happen through here, I'm blown away. I'm really impressed. The discussion yesterday was terrific, and I'm looking forward to an equally wonderful discussion today and chance to connect with the working groups and the governance discussion. Governance is always a critical part of this, and so we're looking forward to getting input there as well.
And I'm seeing some great comments in the chat, Christy. I'm seeing a
Yes.
call out. Nancy Lorenzi calls out Mark Muson's presentation, and I think Tony Solomonides also was similarly impressed by Dr. Scheuermann's talk. I see invigorating. I see exciting. This is great feedback, and a really interesting comment from Alan Rector and around issues in getting doctors to accept MCBK and new models of delivery. I think that's a really astute observation.
I really appreciate that. When we look for feedback, I mean, it's always great to get that pat on the back and that positive message because I think there was a lot of that happening yesterday and through this effort overall. But also, I think looking at ways that we can continue to improve and do better. And so I really appreciate that comment about more publicity is needed. That's always a tricky thing about how to get the word out to the right folks at the right time, especially because I know everyone is so busy. And so, that'll provide, I'm sure, lots of good food for thought for the MCBK North America team as we're thinking about what to do in future conversations and continuing to engage in a really inclusive and welcoming way.
Christy, I see a comment here about social media, which reminds me that we have Josh Rubin, who has been steadfastly monitoring and promoting yesterday's and today's sessions through through Twitter or X at Mobilize CBK. So if feel free to follow the conversation there as well.
Wonderful. Terrific. Well, I think we are ready for our main event. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh for the introduction. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christy. And just to confirm, Nora, if you would, do we have Dr. Holvey with us?
Yes, we do. I'm just trying to make sure that she's able to start her video
Okay,
and get unmuted, but yeah, she is here.
wonderful, fantastic. Well, maybe with that, I can go ahead and make a brief introduction then of today's featured keynote speaker, Dr. Aaron Holvey. Dr. Holvey serves as Chief of Research Infrastructure at PCORI, and in this role, Dr. Holvey executes strategies to advance patient-centered outcomes, research methods, and study design develops and leads a team that will deliver on PCORI's vision of a large, efficient, and patient-centered clinical data research infrastructure, and leads strategies to advance training and knowledge for patient-centered outcomes research. Dr. Holvey has more than 20 years of experience in health policy and health services research, with extensive experience leading efforts to improve healthcare access and drive health system transformation. Examples include the Electronic Data Methods Forum, management of Academy Health's Methods Council, the development of several training programs and online resources, including state health facts. Dr. Holvey has also worked for KFF, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and has consulted for state and local health departments and delivery systems. A common thread across Dr. Holvey's roles and responsibilities is collaboration with local health system partners across the U.S., including patients, consumers, clinicians, payers, policymakers, and others, to promote innovative uses of health data to improve healthcare quality and health. Dr. Holvey is a widely published and cited author of reports and peer-reviewed articles on health insurance access and coverage, as well as health IT infrastructure needed to build learning health systems. With that, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Erin Holvey.
Thanks so much, Josh, for that really kind introduction. And, it's always wild, right, to hear all of the different paths that one takes over a career supporting the development of computable biomedical knowledge, which my career certainly has. And so I'm really thrilled to join all of you today. If you will bear with me, I'm going to share my screen to get the slides up. I have a new computer, and that's what I was contending with earlier. So let me just double check. Desktop here. Can you all see my slides?
I'm not seeing them yet, Erin.
Okay, let me see. Let's see if this works. Okay, it looks like Nor, I'm going to have to allow Zoom to share my screen. So this is going to take me 1 more minute. Sorry. Let's see, that should work there. Oops. Okay, let me see. Hope this works. Let's see. It's telling me that I have to quit and reopen, but hopefully, can you all see my slides now?
No, but Dr. Holvey, I'll share your presentation for you if
That
that's
would be great. Thanks, Nora. I was just going to ask if that was a good backup. Yeah,
No worries.
sometimes between new systems and software, it's just helpful to go that direction. Okay.
Yeah, let me just get it up.
Can you just let me know when it's up and then I can.
Sometimes we have to mobilize Zoom, and that's okay.
Exactly. And while we're getting this pulled up and it looks like maybe we're there, I just want to note that I have a special guest joining me from our team. Nick Kaselniak is one of our program officers at PCORI, who leads work with the Patient-Centered Clinical Research Network, or PCORNet, as it's most commonly known. And so Nick is going to join me for that section of the presentation when we get there. So great. Well, without further ado, and thanks for everyone's patience, why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide, please? Great. So I'm going to take a really quick run through a number of different resources and funding opportunities for PCORI, because I think it really is helpful for those of you who may be less familiar with the organization, or maybe less familiar with some of the changes that have occurred within PCORI and some of the funding programs since 2019 when PCORI was reauthorized. I think it's really helpful to just share the breadth of activities that are ongoing and updates that are happening. I think it's all extremely exciting work. And it really demonstrates the way that PCORI actively supports FAIR principles with our resources and funding opportunities. So I'll just let you have a quick look at this, but the main point is, we're going to try to cover the waterfront in a couple of different areas here. So next slide, please. So again, I think most of you are probably familiar with the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which was authorized in 2010 to be the leading funder of comparative clinical effectiveness research in the United States. PCORI was created really to be a public-private entity that would fund studies that would help people to make better informed healthcare decisions, and again, would have that type of independence and ability to reflect feedback from a wide variety of stakeholders and communities. So next slide, please. Our mission, as I just mentioned, is really to help make sure that people are able to make better informed healthcare decisions and to improve healthcare delivery and outcomes by producing the type of high integrity evidence-based information that comes from comparative clinical effectiveness research and is guided by patients, caregivers, and the broader healthcare community. Next slide, please. So I always like to emphasize, really what that means, right? So for folks who are less deeply embedded in the patient-centered CER community, there are a couple of requirements that play out within the letters of intent and funding announcements that PCORI offers. And so really the type of research that we fund must do the following things. First of all, it must demonstrate meaningful engagement of patients and other communities or stakeholders throughout the entirety of the research process. It must compare at least 2 medical treatments, services, or healthcare practices, each of which really must have demonstrated, even in a letter of intent, established efficacy for that treatment or widespread use. And again, this is where I think, talking about computable phenotypes, and as maybe Nick will talk about in a bit, even sort of how we compute and can demonstrate the widespread use of treatments, right? What the sort of phenotypes are for the interventions is particularly important. And then really making sure that the outcomes of the research focus on compelling real-world decisional dilemmas that are faced by patients, clinicians, family members, and other stakeholders. And of course, that the results of the research can produce the type of evidence that really can be applied in real-world settings to lead to impact over the longer term. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in 2019, PCORI was reauthorized, and as part of that process, there was an effort to reinvigorate, really to define a set of national priorities for health. So these are 5 ambitious long-term goals that, as you can see, are interconnected and are more mutually reinforcing, and that really guide all of PCORI's funding and other initiatives. So these 5, again, very important. Obviously, the primary focus is on increasing evidence for existing interventions and emerging innovations in health. The work that I'm talking about today is on this right-hand side, where we focus on enhancing the infrastructure that really will accelerate the type of patient-centered CER that we're funding. Obviously, there's a focus on enhancing the science of dissemination and implementation to get to that pragmatic, evidence spread and use that I mentioned. And a big focus in 2 areas related to both accelerating progress toward an integrated learning health system and a very ambitious goal to not just support, not just advance, but actually to achieve health equity, which is really critical to all of our activities. Next slide, please. So I'll turn first to talk about the methods of patient-centered CER that PCORI funds that all of you should be aware of, and that we hope you'll spread more of, more word about this funding program. Next slide, please. So I mentioned, I just figured I'd start with kind of an overview slide of a number of research funding opportunities for PCORI to give you an overview, but I'm going to focus on the second bar, the methods funding and some of the areas of that portfolio, because I think it really does have a lot of relevance and resonance for MCBK. So next slide, please. Methods portfolio overall has been, in existence for over 10 years and has funded approximately 150 different projects aimed at improving or advancing the methods of patient-centered CER. And you can see that there's been about $160 million budgeted for all of those projects, has been highly, highly productive. Over 600 peer-reviewed publications have come out of this portfolio and focused area. And it really is just a tremendous opportunity to provide sustained funding really for the development of methods in patient-centered CER. Next slide, please. So this just gives you kind of a overview. Each of these projects is up to $750,000 in direct costs for up to 36 months. And this is a regular, sustained opportunity that PCORI makes available. On average, we get about 20 letters of intent and 20 applications per cycle, generally funding about 4 to 6 projects per cycle. So at present, the areas of focus for the Improving Methods PCORI funding announcement, or PFA, if you hear me lapse into acronyms, is a consistent focus on methods to improve study design, methods that support data research networks, methods to improve the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in clinical research. I understand that was a big focus of yesterday's discussion and pretty much everywhere we go these days. And then really, I think, a very important area of our work that's quite unique, which is methods related to ethical and human subjects protections, which again, there's a lot of intersection, obviously, with discussions happening in the AI and machine learning space as well. And these are constantly under sort of review and discussion. Next slide, please. The work of of thinking about sort of what the areas of the portfolio should be, but most importantly, the focus on developing standards to guide the methodologies that are used in PCORI funding projects is driven by PCORI's methodology committee, which is appointed by PCORI's Board of Governors and actually really takes responsibility for updating and developing new methodological standards to guide the work in patient-centered CER. And I won't sort of belabor the list of folks or read that to you. I'm sure several of you know some of the folks on this list, perhaps especially Suzanne Bakken, who's currently the editor-in-chief of JAMIA, Adam Wilcox, and many others on this list. Really just a terrific group of people to be guiding PCORI's work in methods. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that the methodology committee has principal responsibility for defining methodology standards. So I won't go through this in too much detail. The reason I thought this would be interesting, particularly to bring to MCBK for consideration, is because we are actually in the process of starting a refresh to really look at all of the standards and look for ways to make the standards not only most comprehensive and appropriate to guide the work that PCORI funds, but also to look for opportunities to improve translation and uptake of the methodology standards, which again, sounds like it's very much part and parcel to the work that you're all doing. So thinking about how we can translate and sort of summarize and make it easier to access the best tools to implement the most effective methods is a very big focus of ours, because as you can see here, there are actually 65 methodology standards, hopefully soon to be 2 new standards that are being developed in the usual care space to guide the use of usual care as a comparator. And so that's a lot of content, obviously, for investigators to absorb and to employ as effectively as possible. You know, we think it's very doable, but again, it's going to require computable knowledge, I think, to really move best practices forward. Next slide, please. So another component of the work that we're doing that we thought would be of interest to MCBK is implementing PCORI's data sharing policy and the patient-centered outcomes data repository, which was designed to really be the action arm of the policy. Next slide, please. So in 2018, PCORI developed the policy for data management and data sharing with the methodology committee, and it was really designed to stipulate that all research data and data documentation from certain, though really most, PCORI-funded studies should be deposited in a data repository to facilitate data sharing. Since that time, PCORI worked to implement the policy by building out the patient-centered outcomes data repository, which is housed by ICPSR at the University of Michigan. And over time, right, as different research projects have matured and had data to deposit, we now have a growing set of resources that are available for investigators or researchers to apply, to use, to look at reproducibility, as well as other sort of new areas of investigation that can reuse the data from PCORI-funded CER trials, specifically the clinical trials, are largely the first group that's available. And as of February, so as of this month, there are now 12 CER studies with a lot of data. This includes very large projects like the Adaptable study, the Aspirin study that used Picornet several years ago that some of you may be aware of. So they're just very large studies. And there, of course, are a number of other research projects that will be coming, and PCODR will continue to grow over the coming years, but we really would welcome help getting word out about the availability of this burgeoning resource for the field. And of course, we have PCORI's data sharing webpage and the ICPSR site, which on the next slide, please. You can see here is the link to PCODR. And again, as you think about sharing this information, what we're really trying to do with PCODR in terms of letting folks know that there now, again, is this growing set of data that's available for use. We want folks to know that we have a strong commitment to facilitating both reproducible analyses to support the integrity of PCORI-funded studies, as well as opportunities to build out new study findings or to integrate data from multiple studies to generate new evidence within the PCODR environment. And so again, there's studies now on low back pain, stroke, cardiovascular, and mental health. And I'm happy to share some of our outreach materials related to PCODR if that's of interest. Next slide, please. Okay, so I get to take a break for a couple minutes and invite Nick, if you can come online. Nick, to for a few words on Picornet. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. So if we can go to the next slide. Great. So as many of you may be aware, Picornet is an initiative funded by PCORI since 2014. And it was funded to be a national resource that's open to all. And so I like to characterize Picornet as more of a living laboratory that is continuously adapting to the changing research infrastructure needs for the conduct of large national scale research, such as leveraging real-world clinical data captured through EHRs and linking to external data sources to enhance the capacity to actually conduct health research. While Picornet isn't necessarily a data network per se, it is a ripe laboratory and learning health system infrastructure to really build and mobilize computable biomedical knowledge. I should say that the PCORI board authorized funding for Picornet to really be designed to support faster, more efficient CER, or comparative clinical effectiveness research, with a reusable, scalable infrastructure for the conduct of a wide range of national scale research activities, particularly within diverse patient populations. A key distinction between Picornet and other networks is really its commitment to embedding patient partnership and community engagement in all facets of the network. And I should note that Picornet is not an arm of PCORI, and PCORI does not in any way own the network or the data or receive any data at all. So we can go to the next slide. Great. So with EHR data captured through more than 13,000 clinical sites of care and more than 30 million patients available for clinical trial recruitment, Picornet can be to some extent comparable to the nation demographically. Picornet partners actually continue to work and continuously improve the resources and tools to advance health research using the network so that each study is really able to improve on the last. Already, there's been more than 35 patient-centered national-scale Picornet studies that have been funded by PCORI as well as other funders to be conducted using the network infrastructure, with well over 100 studies that have actually been conducted using data powered by Picornet. There's criteria for what constitutes a Picornet study, and this includes leveraging at least two sites from, or two or more sites from Picornet clinical research networks, using network resources such as the Picornet Common Data Model, meaningfully engaging stakeholders, and also regularly reporting performance metrics, as well as sharing best practices with the network. Go to the next slide. So as I noted, Picornet is a complex adaptive infrastructure that includes over 13,000 clinical sites of care within 8 large, diverse clinical research networks. And so the backbone of Picornet is really these 8 clinical research networks, or CRNs, which are themselves networks comprising data marts and clinical sites that are distributed across the US. So each CRN comprises multiple data marts, or for a total of 77 network data marts, or what may be referred to as PCORnet CRN members. So of note, PCORI awarded enhancement funding in 2023 for the network to add 16 new sites. I do want to say PCORnet is open to all, whether you have an institutional affiliation with any of the 77 CRN members or not. And so we encourage investigators, funders, patient groups, and health systems to really explore PCORnet and consider it as a possible platform for their future studies assessing the health of the US population. Go to the next slide. So the network comprises multiple services to support the research and infrastructure activities. The network includes a governance structure through the PCORnet Steering Committee and subcommittees focused on data, research, and engagement to consider recommendations for and feasibility of network advancement activities that are within the scope of the current funding, PCORI funding awards for infrastructure. For those of you affiliated with a network member site, I encourage you to reach out to your CRN site lead to discuss participating in network activities, and information related to those CRNs are located on the PCORnet website at pcornet.org. All network communications and convening, as well as the coordinated quarterly data curation, common data model, maintenance and expansion activities, and distributed query fulfillment are managed by a unified coordinating center for PCORnet. So this coordinating center is also actively developing a metadata repository that stores computable phenotypes, code sets, and other knowledge developed from research and prep to research activities about the data capabilities of the network. For those interested in learning more, as I mentioned, I encourage you to visit the pcornet.org website, and also contact the PCORnet front door to assist with learning more. In terms of the scale of PCORnet, as I mentioned, PCORnet includes 8 clinical research networks, which have significant national scale representation. And as demonstrated by this heat map of the density of patient encounters, with green indicating the highest density and purple and lighter shades indicating least dense. So the network continues to expand based on the evolving research needs and strategic priorities. Go to the next slide. So other ways to use the network for research and develop innovative capabilities for the network includes the recently added Category 3 option for PCORnet studies to the standing PCORI Broad Pragmatic Studies funding announcement. Total costs, although identified here as 10 million, that is actually now up to 12 million for 5 years. So applicants to Category 3 must contact the PCORnet front door before LOI submission. And to be a PCORnet study under this announcement, proposed studies must align with those criteria I mentioned earlier, which are also outlined on this slide, as well as including sites from at least 2 CRNs, but also must address PCORI's national priorities for health, of which Aaron previously mentioned includes accelerating progress towards learning health systems, focusing on emerging innovations, and enhancing infrastructure, to name a few of the 5. Next slide. So finally, please, in relation to the BPS, or broad pragmatic studies, these BPS applicants have an opportunity to also include in their cost activities that substantially enhance the study's CER aims and may advance the PCORnet infrastructure. Examples of these activities include, but are not limited to those on the slide. So collection and study of patient-centered economic outcomes, developing and implementing updates to common data models or other data standards to promote interoperability, implementing new technologies such as Smart on Fire apps to collect patient-reported outcomes, developing and implementing new computable phenotypes to identify individuals with complex conditions for inclusion in studies, and then implementing and monitoring the effect of enhanced data monitoring processes to reduce data missingness. All of these and more are included in the funding announcement. And next slide. So lastly, PCORnet recently convened 2 work groups focused on PCORI topic themes related to intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD, and maternal mortality, morbidity and mortality, so MMM. These work groups actually develop reports of which are publicly available on PCORI's website that identify roadmaps to accelerate research in these two areas using PCORnet. The reports really focus on identifying critical gaps and needs and knowledge and prioritize the unanswered CER questions. They include results from a PCORnet distributed query to identify populations with specific conditions that are eligible for study participation. And they identify recommendations for future infrastructure enhancements to continue to expand the network's capabilities. Next slide. And so if you're interested in PCORnet, as I mentioned, go to the pcornet.org website, and you can also subscribe to the quarterly PCORnet newsletter through the QR code here on the slide. You can also follow PCORnet on various social media. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Erin.
Thanks, Nick. That was a great overview. And again, we realize there's a lot of content here, so we're happy to loop back. I will just say that things move so quickly at PCORI that when we sent these slides to the team a couple days ago, the change in the funding announcement that Nick mentioned with the increase in the cap for funding for these broad pragmatic studies to $12 million had not been announced yet. So that's a very, very recent bit of information. If we can move to the next slide, please, Nor. Great. So I'm just going to wrap up with a couple last comments here about efforts in workforce development, which is also part of our division on infrastructure and innovation. In the next slide, please. So PCORI has a new unit focused explicitly on workforce development. And so I just wanted to highlight for all of you, this is really a space to watch with respect to how PCORI is looking at the landscape and looking for new opportunities to support workforce development that will really reach across sort of traditional research training as well as learning health system objectives. And so we define the PCOR, the patient-centered CER workforce broadly to include not only researchers, but clinicians, community members, patients and family members, and others from diverse backgrounds. And so we are, again, actively engaged in a set of strategic planning activities to really think about how PCORI should best support and advance workforce development in this space. Next slide, please. So one of these activities that's already ongoing, and some of you may be connected, or several of you may even be connected to many of these programs that were just recently announced, the AHRQ and PCORI Learning Health System eStar Centers program was funded last year to support training that accelerates progress towards an integrated learning health system. And I'll talk more about some of those sites in a moment, or just at least make sure you're all familiar with them. But the kickoff meeting for that activity is actually coming up in a couple weeks. And I think it's going to be a really exciting opportunity to think about how to build out these learning health system science competencies that were developed by ARC, now close to about 10 years ago, and really think about how these types of programs can build partnerships and enhance diversity to promote learning health systems. And you can see some of those objectives on the left. Next slide, please. So just real quick for your reference, and you'll get these slides. These are the 16 ARC and PCORI Learning Health System eStar centers that were funded this last year. And again, we can come back to talk about any of this content in just a bit. Next slide, please. Overall, as I mentioned, our strategic thinking sort of building from the AHRQ and PCORI Learning Health System program is to think about how to build out those types of activities. And so these are some of the areas that we are actively contemplating in terms of how we would work with our federal partners in particular to enhance activities around training awards, additional capacity building funding, the types of materials and resources are needed, as well as other types of formal or informal opportunities within learning networks, mentorship programs, and other types of professional development. So again, I suspect this is something that the MCBK community talks a lot about. It's one of the reasons I gave a heart to the point about the importance of smart people, even when talking about artificial intelligence, because again, this is a people infrastructure. The data, as we all know, moves at the speed of trust, as the old saying goes. And so really making sure we continue to invest in people is a real commitment PCORI has made. Next slide, please. So just really briefly, just want to wrap up with some efforts that Nick and I have particularly been involved in at PCORI to think about where we go next in terms of accelerating progress towards an integrated learning health system. This work is fairly nascent, again, building on all of the pillars that I've talked about today. And Nora, if we can go to the next slide, please. What we're trying to look at really is how to think about the variety of ways of really characterizing what learning health systems mean from an operational standpoint, and then what that entails in terms of really thinking concretely about the types of dedicated resources that are needed. I think you can probably see in Nick's presentation from PCORnet, as well as mine, talking about the combination of methods work, as well as support for people, open science, et cetera, that we're really trying to think about how do we operationalize a lot of these concepts. And there's no question in my mind they will need to be braided, right? So the funding opportunities that Nick and I talked about, no one of them is going to sort of solve all of the challenges that we face as a scientific community. But the concept is that together, braiding these different opportunities and working on developing these resources collectively can really help us move forward towards a learning health system. And so I just, would sort of conclude here with this in my next slide to really say, it's quite clear that, everyone does not agree on the dimensions of learning health system infrastructure, but that is the conversation that we believe we need to have. And so on the final slide, what we've been doing is trying to sort of put together some convenings, and Chuck Friedman and others on this call, have been very involved in helping us with these discussions and leading these discussions to try and really consider how we can build awareness and characterize the landscape of health data infrastructure and innovation in a way that will really support more of a sort of service orientation to build the kind of integrated learning health systems that we need, and looking as we move forward to develop really a collaborative approach to do that work. And so look forward to all of your comments and feedback, and Nick and I are happy to answer any questions about the work PCORI is doing, and make sure that all of you, importantly, have the tools that you need to help us spread the word about these funding opportunities and resources. So thanks again. And Josh, I will turn things back to you.
Thank you so much, Erin and Nick, for a fantastic presentation. And wow, what a portfolio of activities that PCORI has underway, from infrastructure development to methods development to workforce promotion and upskilling. Fantastic, and I really appreciate you going over that with us in our community. I see one hand up with a question or a comment. I don't see your name, sorry, iPhone. But if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Alan Morris.
Right, it's Alan Morris.
Oh, hi, Alan.
Hi. This is a very interesting and impressive presentation. I have one concern, and that is the emphasis on using usual care as a reference standard. Usual care, or commonly called standard care, is basically a legal construct. It's not a medical or scientific construct. And people who have addressed this have concluded it's not a very reliable reference or control population. Would the presenters care to comment about that?
Sure. Thanks so much for the question. And Nick may want to pop on as well, because he was really leading the development of the usual care standard. This exact point was a subject of much discussion among the methodology committee in developing the standard. And really the objective was to clarify some of the types of information that merit review panels would need to effectively make a decision that what was being characterized as usual care was in fact sufficiently defined to allow for there to be a real point of comparison. And so the standard itself focuses on really describing the care and sort of the degree to which this is a clinical question for which there is true equipoise, and then creates a framework for describing the measurement strategy that will be used, sort of similar to the active comparator, to make sure that true comparisons and sort of reference between the two can be can discern an outcome or an effect. And so what we do continue to emphasize, however, is that the standard is only one piece of the puzzle. As I mentioned, it will still be important for and really required for merit review panels to evaluate the information that an investigator submits on their usual care comparator. Both, clearly the investigators will have to demonstrate they meet the standard, but that is, that is a necessary but not sufficient condition. So we are relying on the merit review process as well as PCORI's programmatic review combined with the standards to address many of the questions that you raised. And there was a public comment process as well. We're happy to share links to the feedback and information that we received from the public. Nick, anything else you want to add on that?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered all of the key points. I mean, the only thing I'll just further add is really just the notion that PCORI's current methodology standards, does include a reference to usual care as a comparator, but only that it should be used when it represents a legitimate and coherent clinical option. And so this standard actually builds on that and provides further guidance.
Oh, I think, Alan, we can't quite hear you if you're.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Well, to clarify, since we don't capture in usual care why a clinician decides to follow the guideline or she decides to reject the guideline, we don't know the method that's employed. And considering usual care an experimental arm without a definable method is rather puzzling from the fundamental scientific perspective.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. And again, these were, this exact question and discussion, and the balance with looking at pragmatic questions and the way that care, is really delivered, which of course is the focus of PCORI's remit with CER. Was again the subject of much discussion and debate, and again, we're happy to share the public comments on this point. And likewise, again, we'll just sort of remind folks, we'll make sure to get MCBK any future standards as they're developed and opportunities for public comment to incorporate your perspectives. So thank you.
Erin and Nick, I have a question, if you don't mind. I'm curious about the experiences, the PCORI's experiences in translating the data that you now capture and make available via this robust infrastructure, and where you see, or the PCORI perspective on how those data may be translated into knowledge and making that knowledge more computable, whether through computable guidelines or decision trees, or as we move into what we had the robust discussion yesterday about AI, ML. Anything that you can share there on where you see this going via computable knowledge?
Yeah, there are a couple of different ways in which that type of work is supported, Josh. And so, what I want to emphasize is partially that PCORI does have some funding strategies and approaches related to dissemination that explicitly anticipate the need to not only think about generating the evidence, but moving it into practice. And so there is a process with our dissemination awards that actually reviews the strength of evidence that is coming out of CER studies, and then will invite projects that had very robust evidence to submit subsequent proposals for additional funding that will really address different modes of dissemination. So that is one pathway that has been used, and there are instances for some of those projects where it's a very sort of explicit sort of decision-making protocol and use of computable biomedical knowledge tools and in sort of clinical decision-making support. That, however, we do have to be a little cautious. So just so folks are aware, there's a bit of a dividing line between the funding that PCORI receives through the PCOR Trust Fund for these types of activities compared to AHRQ. So AHRQ, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, received the bulk of funding related to dissemination implementation. And so several of you are probably familiar with, and Josh, you're familiar with work that AHRQ has done in this space as well. So we actively collaborate with AHRQ in this space and in this area. And then I'll also just emphasize there are other opportunities to think about computable biomedical knowledge in the methodology space as well. And so there really are kind of a number of different, tools that we have. I think, the issue is, or the, sort of set of considerations for PCORI is we of course agree this is an important thing to do. We are looking for investigator-initiated proposals to tell us where the community wants to go in terms of the types of projects and funding for this work. So rest assured that PCORI has a strong sort of degree of support for all of this type of work. And so we're looking to all of you and your colleagues to send us the best proposals via these mechanisms.
Thank you. And maybe building on that last point, Erin, a question I have is how might the MCBK community of policymakers and informaticians and librarians and patient advocates and others contribute to PCORI's ambitious goals for making knowledge computable within learning health systems?
Yeah, well, I think Nick said it really well when he talked about the fact that resources like PCORnet, I'm not saying only PCORnet, but resources like PCORnet really represent a learning laboratory that we hope that, all of the community members within MCBK will consider using. As Nick mentioned, the resources are open to all to propose projects or to look for other types of collaborations to make the most use of these resources. So we would welcome follow-up and are happy to send links, resources, connect you with program officers who can answer questions about potential project ideas. So I see lots of opportunities. And, I also mentioned that the methodology committee will be refreshing the methodology standards. And so if MCBK members are interested in tracking that process or providing public input and feedback and ways to actually make the standards more computable, we're very open to all of those suggestions and collaboration.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And we would love to pass those resources on to the community here. And if the community here has any additional questions for Erin and Nick, feel free to add them to the chat. We'll be sure to forward those and do our best to get your questions answered. I want to say, oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask. I didn't know, Chuck, if you had a question. I know you popped on camera.
Oh, I popped on. No, sorry. First of all, Erin, thank you so much, and you too, Nick, for your wonderful presentations. I popped on because I'm going to be introducing the next part of.
You're up next. Great.
And yeah, but part of my up next was to thank you both formally, which I will now do yet again, because this. Your presentations were a marvelous contribution to this program.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much.
Aaron and Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. And on behalf of the MCBK North America chapter meeting audience, congratulations on all that you're achieving and carrying out. Love to see what's going on with eStar and see how that grows and progresses over the years to come. I want to say goodbye. We are welcome to stay and join us. We are going to move over to the next item on our agenda, in which Chuck, you'll introduce Dr. Koru. Thank you again for this fantastic presentation. Chuck?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm going to introduce this session on publishing computable biomedical knowledge by first offering a couple of introductory remarks for which I will use a couple of slides. And but to make for some continuity, I will introduce Gunesh Koru now, and that way we will have a smooth transition from my brief remarks to his more substantive remarks. He'll be speaking for about 10 minutes, and we're hoping to have some time left at the end after his presentation for a few questions and hopefully answers from Gunesh. Gunesh, I want to confirm that you're here. You here? There you are. Okay, great.
Yes, I am.
So my good friend and colleague Gunesh Koru has a primary appointment in the Health Policy and Management Department and a secondary appointment in the Department of Biomedical Informatics at the University of Arkansas. He's got a background in software engineering and computer science. He conducts translational informatics research to improve pressing healthcare challenges. He currently works in relation to data quality, public data access and communication, and IT adoption for use in healthcare quality improvement. He works with interdisciplinary teams to address these challenges in home healthcare and hospice, healthcare administration, and maternal health. He's a fellow of the American Medical Informatics Association, a member of the editorial board of the Journal of the American Medical Directors Association, and most relevant to this presentation, Gunesh has been, since 2021, associate editor for the Journal of Learning Health Systems, and his specific responsibility is for the journal's computable biomedical knowledge publications. So Gunesh will be talking about publication from the perspective of his experience with the Learning Health Systems Journal, which brings me to my slide, which I hope I can find here. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Am I visible?
Yep.
Okay. So, and that in fact is the second slide. So we're using Learning Health Systems, the journal, and Gunesh's experience as our editor for computable knowledge publication as a focus for this session, because as this slide says, Learning Health Systems is the official journal of MCBK. Just a few things about the journal, if you're not familiar with it. It is edited at the University of Michigan and published by John Wiley and Sons. It's a fully open access and online journal. Among the features of an open access and online journal is that articles are immediately accessible in early view after they are accepted, well, almost immediately. And moreover, and I'm becoming more and more appreciative of this because there is no paper version of the journal. We have a great deal of flexibility in publishing articles of different lengths. because the precious commodity of physical pages that often limit the lengths of articles that might be deserving of more length really don't apply to an online journal. We're proud of our rigorous peer review. It took us 7 years, but we finally achieved an impact factor, and everybody tells me the impact factor we got last year of 3.11 is very good for a new journal getting its first impact factor. The journal is widely read, and we know this because the only way to get access to the articles is to download them. And we've been running last year at 110,000 article downloads per year. So we believe the content is being seen, and we're in the 8th year of publication. One of the expressions of being the official journal of MCBK is that every year we publish a summary of the MCBK meetings in the journal. And here you see a page shot of the second annual MCBK public meeting, which was, I guess, published in 2019. And we are also proud of the fact that we've received many excellent and have published many excellent submissions, very relevant to MCBK, including this article you see here on categorizing metadata to help mobilize computable biomedical knowledge. And you'll be hearing more about the metadata work a little bit later in this meeting. Now, just to create a little more context for Gunesh's remarks, one way to think about publication of CBK is to think about how computable knowledge extends the publication pipeline of biomedical knowledge. In the good old days, when there were only human readable versions of knowledge, typically published in articles, these would be peer reviewed and would go into a traditional library. With the advent of, for many scientific publications, the capability to make a computable representation of the new knowledge that this publication has generated, we see a further pipeline. You're not done, in other words, when you've published an article. The article's model can be extracted from the paper. Often you see these models in a table, but sometimes the models are not representable in a table. Then with programming, the knowledge can be represented in a computable digital object. And following peer review and publication, the artifact itself could be published, made publicly available, and stored in an extended kind of library, which could have a collection of computable knowledge in parallel with its collection of human readable knowledge. So with this as background, let me turn things over to Gunesh Koru, who will talk about his experience in working with the journal or leading the journal's efforts to extend this pipeline, building on the metaphor I showed in my second slide. Gunesh, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate this.
Thanks, Chuck. So I hope everybody can hear me and see the slide. So I would like to first thank all the attendees and organizers. It's been a fantastic meeting. And our chairs, Christian, Josh, and Noor and Janelle, for taking care of all the logistics. It's not a small task to run a conference, and of course, Chuck. So as Chuck mentioned, we have started publishing CBKs. I encourage you to check the Learning Health Systems Journal website. So we started by putting some information about the guidelines of publishing. And we did this in late 2021. And similar to these old plane races, getting the fuel from the ground, we had to go quickly, and we did make timely additions and revisions, which I believe worked. And there is now a special issue that you can take a look. It was published in October, and I had a commentary to go with that one as well. So I'm including the reference at the bottom. So in that commentary, I had some, explanation about what a computable biomedical knowledge artifact is. But coming to this meeting, I thought that there could be still, even within this community, there could be sometimes, differences of opinion about what a CBK is. So I took my abstract from that commentary and gave it to DALL-E and asked DALL-E to give me a picture for what a CBK artifact is. So this is an AI-generated picture, which captured some of the ideas, like going from data to knowledge to practice in a learning health systems journal as the contribution of the CBK artifact, and it's in the middle with probably some components. So in the scope of peer-reviewed publication, we use CBK to refer to computable biomedical knowledge artifacts because of the language we developed over a period of time. For example, when our assistant editor, Kathleen, tells me, or asks the question, did the author send their CBKs there? She's actually referring to the artifact. So a CBK is a mobilizable software program, not simply static data, documents, images, or videos. So here I would like to focus on observable behavior because CBKs must embody behavior that can be used to transform specific inputs into observable outputs expected according to the study goals. So in that sense, this is like a software program you can execute on a hardware or software machine to observe the outputs. They don't have to be always working like pure functions in the functional programming world. There could be some side effects, and you could be in this case developing CBK as a predictive model. It could be a program implementing AI algorithms, or you may be using AI algorithms like generative AI and presenting the outputs in a way that will be useful. But we must be able to look at some observable outputs for peer review purposes. And of course, CBKs include web services, web browser applications, and mobile apps. Could be implemented using several scripting languages, systems programming languages, assembly, or even machine language can be used. Of course, one CBK can include programs written, implemented in different languages. A CBK can be decomposed into multiple dynamic or static objects or modules. This is quite possible, and it can be constructed by reusing and composing multiple objects or modules, or it can be also composed by combining other CBKs. So your study purpose and what behavior you want to be reviewed will determine the borders or granularity level of the CBK for publication. So why publish peer-reviewed CBKs? Because we want to answer critical questions to make the biomedical research enterprise more robust. And these questions still, they are looming there. If you look at a lot of manuscripts, reviewers will often just look at the results of the predictive model or AI algorithm, and there's often not a big concern about whether this really exists or not. But in a still, given growing concerns about so many algorithms posted in many open source platforms, possible plagiarism, predatory publishing, verifying the existence of CBKs is an essential step toward improving the quality of scientific discourse. So we can go from this assumption to actually observing behavior. Did it work as described here? I would immediately admit that it's not possible for us to fully test these software programs because it is a very expensive task. We cannot possibly execute all input combinations or exercise all execution paths. What we do is we can observe main functional behaviors, whether it works as described, even some non-functional behaviors such as performance, its ease of use, these characteristics. And also another important question in the biomedical research enterprise is, okay, we have access to these programs, but is it documented? Here we can go from hard to even find it to reusing CBK that we have a certain level of trust. So here, I think I receive this question often, is it not sufficient if I just publish the code? So we definitely encourage releasing your source code. But there are definitely intellectual property licensing and confidentiality concerns. These are also realities. And a lot of computing innovations, if you look at the history, came from the industry as well. So if submitters have sufficient IP permissions, exposing an archiving behavior is still possible, and it can still support research and innovation. And this above option can be an effective marketing tool for those in the industry. I would urge you to consider. But if somebody says we cannot even expose the behavior, of course, then there is nothing that can be peer reviewed. But regardless, open source or not, peer reviews are essential. If we don't know anything from the history of empirical software engineering research, we know that peer reviews are very useful tools for improving the trustworthiness on the programs, their quality. So here the potential benefits are several with tangibility. So it's often hard for people to read about a CBK and understand what it is, but when they start playing with it, it immediately becomes more tangible. So there's this quick visualization aspect of making a working program available. So I think that supports learning. Reproducibility has been expressed as a big concern in some of the scientific communities, even expressed as a crisis. We don't need a crisis in order to increase reproducibility. I mean, if you believe it or not, I think it's always good to shoot toward more reproducibility for scientific endeavors. Reuse can definitely improve our productivity and trust. To be able to reuse something, we need to trust that it works to a certain extent. And also it can bring recognition to a lot of work that's going on in our biomedical research labs, but may be not acknowledged in the traditional publishing venues. So in that sense, it'll benefit the scientists. It can benefit research funding agencies as we can be more productive. We can reuse these CBKs. It'll benefit governments invested in improving the quality, equity, accessibility of healthcare. So industry can benefit from this because I think the old-fashioned development of software that we need to just trust the software and it's going to be useful for your organization changed. A lot of software companies are very open to demonstrating and using various mechanisms that their products will be useful. So I think that's also important, and ultimately, and most importantly, it should benefit patients and families. So experiences with publishing CBK so far, we were fortunate to have a motivated community, and I'd like to thank everybody who submitted their articles or who reviewed their articles. And many of those convincingly demonstrated the behavior of their CBKs. Some couldn't do so. I mean, we had to reject some, but there were a couple of submissions where we resolved issues at the beginning, and maybe some submitters didn't believe that we would run their CBKs and we would give them a good run, but we did. The variety of languages and platforms can be a challenge we have to deal with. Container technologies in this area work quite well. In our case, manuscript serves as documentation, but metadata collection and attaching it to the CBKs is our definitely target. So as Chuck mentioned, I'm also looking forward to Rachel's and Jamie's presentation right after this one about metadata. Interestingly, video recording worked well. We should consider because this could be archivable going forward many years if we can record how MCBK, video record, and some submitters even had audio as well. So we should consider this moving forward. And there are, of course, opportunities and challenges ahead, and this special issue allowed us to learn more about those challenges. I'm not going to list them to you because we have an interactive exercise and we want to discuss them with you. I'll stop here, and thanks for listening. I'm very interested in learning from you, and back to you, Chuck or Noor.
Thanks, Gunesh. I think the next part of this session is a very brief poll that I hope will help get a discussion started. I didn't say it explicitly, but I'll say it now. It's probably implied. The journal is very interested in publishing computable biomedical knowledge. The special issue that Gunesh edited is a major first step in this direction, but we're hoping to make computable knowledge publications as a type a regular feature of the journal, some of which will constitute some of the articles published in each issue. So to help guide us, we have a poll that we would like to take right now. Noor, Janelle, and there's our poll. How are we doing with responses, Janelle?
I can respond to that. So it's been 40 seconds so far, and we have 38% of people responding, 39% of people responding. So yeah, answers are just still coming in pretty quickly.
Okay, we'll wait another couple of minutes. And Gunesh, I'd like, please, you take the conversation from here, okay?
Sure.
Okay, it looks like we have 58% participation right now. Still some answers coming in, so we'll just keep it open for probably another 30 seconds. All right, so since we're approaching that 2-minute mark, the poll has now closed, and looks like Janelle has got the results up on the screen for you to see.
Thank you, Noor. Well, it's encouraging. We can see at least like 60%, somewhat likely or above. And I see that the biggest concern here is lack of time and resources for doing it, followed by lack of knowledge of how to prepare for submission, and not enough recognition or benefit from a peer-reviewed publication. So if you'd like, we can start. I mean, these are also consistent with my observations. And as scientists, of course, we get credit by getting grants and publishing. The lack of time and resources for doing it could be also tied to the not enough recognition, because if there was enough recognition and benefit perceived by the scientists, then maybe they would make more time and resources available. Perhaps on behalf of the funding agencies, providing resources for this is a step forward. I know that NIH revised their data sharing guidelines to make any NIH research, subject to data sharing rules, appropriate sharing of data, of course. Maybe there's something that can be done on the funding agency side, but what are your thoughts about not enough recognition or benefit? Is there something that can be done on the academic enterprise side? And instead of speaking too much, I would like to hear from our community.
So I think there was a question in the chat from Kazim Ali. I'll just point that out. That was at 2:19 p.m. if you scroll up a little.
Yes. MCBK also working with any specific data optimization companies to overcome being ethically led market competition. Articles published. I couldn't understand the question well, Kazim. If you could explain a little bit more, I would appreciate it. We are not working with data optimization companies at the moment, but I'm open to, getting into conversation if it will be useful. So anybody who has opinion about lack of time or resources for doing it, is it only about recognition or benefit, or is it also about creating time in your schedule to document, create metadata? Because even if we have the best metadata standards, if you don't have time, let's say, and resources to enter metadata, then it is not a good use of the standard, right?
You have a couple of hands up, Gunesh.
Oh, sorry, I'm not. Josh, go ahead. Yes, I can see Josh. Josh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ganesh. I had a question, and I'm sorry if I missed this in your presentation, about qualitative data and making qualitative data computable. And if have you put any had any thoughts as to how artifacts or the like would be incorporated or leveraged when doing for any qualitative studies that are submitted?
We haven't had any of those, so I'm assuming in that case the research would be about analyzing qualitative data and coming up with some kind of computing artifact to take qualitative data as input and produce outputs. Yeah, that is a possibility. If we can know the expected outputs and behaviors, you may be, like I said, using generative AI at the back end, and maybe there are some probability distributions behind it. But if we can know the expected range of outputs that the reviewers should look at, then I think those could be also peer reviewed. So far, this is not an area we focused on. A lot of CBKs we received they were primarily focused on structured data.
Yeah, that makes
a question
a lot
from
of
Dr.
sense.
Scheuerman.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little confused about what you mean by computable biomedical knowledge. It seems like you're talking about software artifacts that might be used to either produce computable knowledge or maybe to interpret computable knowledge. But what about the knowledge itself? How does that kind of fit into the framework?
So traditionally, artifacts focused on, or digital objects focused on only resource which was static. But computable biomedical knowledge artifact has a behavior which is enabled by programs or software. That behavior is encoded in software and is a part of the biomedical knowledge artifact. So it could be, let's say, a predictive model, a machine learning algorithm. So when it runs, it exhibits certain behavior. So then that would basically transform some input to output by using the the knowledge encoded. Could be in some cases regression model, could be simulation model. Instead of being a like static resource like a PDF file, like Chuck showed at the beginning, would be a program that is functioning.
Ganesh, also, can you see the comments in the chat? I don't know if any of those are relevant to address. I'm not an expert on any of this, but just wanted to point that out in case there was anything you want to comment on.
Data optimization companies assist publishers in optimizing their website because to appear at the top. Yeah, I think this is related to, whenever we publish metadata about these artifacts, it's possible that companies will have their ways of showing them at the top of the search result, or this is an area that we haven't thought about, because I think even the metadata structure is something that is actively being worked on in the community. And the second comment, if one of the objectives is to make more direct impact on curriculum, make change methods. Turnkey methods, that is possible. I mean, this is like for the scientific discourse, publishing peer-reviewed artifacts, but there could be other ways of making PBKs available through web services, and there could be turnkey methods where it is ready to execute. So here we are mostly talking about supporting a peer review mechanism as a part of scientific discourse. Bruce, you have a question?
Kind of a comment, follow-up to what Preston mentioned, particularly with those of us interested in sort of knowledge standards, like we've talked about yesterday and later today in the HL7 world. Can see the day in the future when, right now we're publishing PDFs a lot, which are hard to abstract into computable delivery, but could see the day down the road as these standards get to more mature, things like the EBM on FHIR, evidence-based medicine on FHIR standard can parse an existing sort of trial into its components. Potentially the clinical practice guideline on FHIR could parse a guideline summary into computable paragraphs or sentences that could be delivered at the point of care in an EHR. Smart on FHIR, of course, is a way of publishing decision support cards. There's a bunch of these that mentioned yesterday in our poster that the Learning Health System group at HL7 is interested. None of it is probably mature enough to make it easy to publish, but those are the kinds of ways I can think of making publication more computable. Another example would be publishing cohort definitions for inclusion-exclusion criteria, say in the OMOP phenotype model. So there's a bunch of these standards that could be potentially used as ways of publishing standardized approaches to parsing the knowledge that right now just exists in a PDF and a bunch of tables and diagrams.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bruce. Great comment. I think aligned with what Preston said. I agree. I think all those mechanisms are useful, and also it can make the peer review process easier. But also we need to consider that there's a great variety of academic research branches and endeavors that are people just programming, R scripts, let's say, and they want to, submit to the journal. So in that case, picking up some very definite ways of preparing CBKs for publication may be kind of too early right now. But yeah, I think these are all good comments. Maybe that's the way to move forward. We'll discuss and see. Are we
I agree that
doing
some of
on
those are
time?
they're bleeding edge approaches right now. They're not mature, but that's the direction that's interesting, at least.
I agree. Any other comments, thoughts? And I see a company name mentioned here, ZoomD. I'll definitely check that out. I should also say that other scientific areas like engineering and computing, they started to think about this problem. There are some standards in ACM about how to publish computable artifacts. So we are following those as well. They are assigning some logos according to how strictly they are validated, if the metadata is assigned to them. So in the future, maybe creating those kind of levels, showing the how much you could reuse a component, or how much it was validated or tested. That could be a possibility as well. So we need to, in the long run, think about how to how to make these more useful on the receiving end, on the reusable side. It's not only about being able to run them. Sometimes it may be about how thoroughly they were tested, and they may not be tested sometimes because of the obvious limitations. It doesn't mean anything bad, but the receiver should know about that. And regarding the recognition that is assigned to it during the academic promotions or tenure, I don't know, but who thinks that there are possibilities to change those perceptions over a period of time? I know that over the decade, at least in some communities like bioinformatics, it changed, and now we also see some data sharing publications. Sorry, data publications.
All right, wonderful. All right, so if there are any other questions or comments, if you'd like to continue this discussion a bit in the chat, please do so. But with that, I just would like to thank you and Chuck both for a terrific session. Thank you so much for making this possible and giving us the opportunity to think a little bit about what publishing CBK means in practical ways, as well as I think, we start thinking aspirationally as well when we start thinking about contributions and recognition and what that means in the grander ecosystem. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Absolutely. And with that, I'd like to now take the opportunity to turn to Dr. Jamie McCusker and Dr. Rachel Richardson for their presentation on the CBK metadata model. Jamie is the Director of Data Operations at the Tetherless World Constellation at RPI. She's worked on applying semantics to numerous projects, including drug repurposing using systems biology, cancer genome resequencing, childhood health and environmental exposure, analysis of sea ice conditions, and material science. She is the architect of the open source WHYIS knowledge graph development and management framework, which has been used across many of these domains. Jamie also co-leads the MCBK technical standards and infrastructure work group. Rachel Richardson is a professor in the Department of Learning Health Sciences at the University of Michigan. She holds a PhD and MS in health informatics and a master's of public health from the University of Texas. She currently leads the EHR core for the NIH Health Systems Research Collaboratory, which is developing standards and quality metrics for clinical phenotyping using EHR data in pragmatic clinical trials. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and Rachel for their comments. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Christy. I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's good to see so many new faces and also so many familiar faces from MCBK. I've been involved in various roles with this initiative and movement since its inception, and it's really exciting to see how things are coming together in these last 2 days and these great discussions that we're having. For the last couple of years within CBK, I've been working closely with the Technical Standards and Infrastructure Work Group, and we've been working tightly, a small but very brave group taking on metadata for CBK. So specifically, our mission was to find some minimal metadata or model for CBK that we call CBK MM. And so we're excited to share our progress and our approach toward this model of metadata for CBK that we're hoping is will enable computable biomedical knowledge to be generalizable, scalable, and usable for every human and machine out there. Our focus is on action and how to achieve some of the vision that Erin Holby gave us in her keynote this morning, and that we've heard throughout the day, to really address important questions and health needs in our country and in our world. And so with that background, I'm going to turn this over to Jamie, who has also a very active member and co-leader of our group. And she has had a wonderful vision and leadership to get us to where we are today. So Jamie, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if you can start on I guess the second slide, at least for now.
Okay, let me, I'll share my slides, hold on.
No, Noor
sure.
put it up.
Yeah, got it.
Noor has it up. I just wanted to make sure that we were in the right spot. Okay, so yeah, the CBK metadata model has came out of basically the need to let knowledge creators describe their own CBK, publishers so they can index it, knowledge managers being able to actually like catalog and use these things, and knowledge users and implementers to be able to find, access, and implement them. Essentially what this is this was inspired by, if you're familiar with Google's dataset search capability, this is actually built off of, the what was referred to at the time as the dataset catalog vocabulary. And the idea for CBK-MM is essentially to give us a similar metadata structure for knowledge. So obviously, knowledge can be a form of data, but it is also its own thing to a large degree and has its own challenges. One other thing is that there hasn't really been a consensus around what we can provide as provide for metadata, and so that was a big piece of that. So so we were trying to essentially enable these sorts of capabilities within knowledge metadata. Next slide. So there are some issues with currently providing it. Like I said, really right now, we have a lot of ways of expressing knowledge, and they're very specific to to what you actually need to do with that knowledge. So ontologies are expressed in OWL, and the clinical decision support tools are expressed using HL7 FHIR constructs, and biomedical databases are stored in XML or JSON or CSV. Some of these are actually even standardized, which is great. But the thing is that obviously there's no common representation for all knowledge, and that's unlikely to happen. And that's not what we're trying to do here. What we are trying to do is to try to come up with a consensus representation for the knowledge, the metadata of knowledge. So how do we summarize this computable knowledge in a way that makes it easy to find and make decisions about? There are some, like I said, there are some things that within healthcare that partly implement this, but a lot of the standards around healthcare are kind of necessarily very complex and infrastructure heavy. You have to set up an HL7 server to publish this sort of thing. There are lots of safeguards in place around privacy and security to prevent unauthorized access of this data. So that's kind of really built into there. And so, but from the perspective of open knowledge or of publishing, kind of publicizing this knowledge, that actually becomes a bit of a challenge instead of it becomes less of a feature when you're trying to deal with that sort of thing. And also, people who are publishing this knowledge aren't necessarily well versed in those representations. And so you can't, for instance, just attach a piece of metadata to a paper where you describe, a new model or a new finding or a new database, and so that it can be picked up. Next slide. So the idea here is actually to use the web. Like, one of the web has become kind of like the most successful way to publish knowledge. And obviously, when we do that with web pages, that's a very different thing from computable knowledge. But there are representations out there for using the structure of the web directly to describe knowledge and to publish knowledge, and also to publish metadata. A lot of these are built on existing standards that those of us who came up through libraries will find familiar, like Dublin Core. And these have all been integrated into what was originally called the semantic web, and then became what was called linked data, and these days tend to be thought of as knowledge graphs. But the core piece of it is that we use URLs to identify things, and we because we use those URLs to identify the things, when we go to those URLs, we can get information about those things. And so what that's done, especially with the advent of JSON LD, which is a way of essentially contextualizing JSON so that it is kind of unambiguous and interpretable without having to write your own code. The actual system is very pluggable. And so we are building off of existing linked data standards, the standard ones that people think about, OWL, RDF, but then there's Shackle for validation, Dublin Core for information metadata, and Prov for provenance. And so, like I say at the bottom, I think of CBKMM essentially as a Lego kit that we've assembled to allow us to publish metadata for computable biomedical knowledge. Next. So we we set up a set of guiding principles for this. We want to enable fair plus trustable and CBK, and make sure that we enable especially open CBK. We want, as I said, we want to build off existing standards. We want to keep it really simple, and we did. There's 17 elements to the CBKMM currently, and it already covers quite a lot of ground with just those 17. We want to be able to, we want this to be generalizable and extensible. And we also want to make sure that the governance is in place. This has actually been our hardest challenge. We want to make sure that there's a governance structure in place that actually keeps this thing going and grows beyond just the group that we've put together. Next slide. So we got together a group of interested volunteers from essentially these meetings, and at one point I said, wait, what if we had a knowledge catalog? What if we could do that? And then we kind of built out from there. We've kind of found a set of priorities around findable and accessible as a start. We moved on and actually spent quite a bit of time trying to find example CBK. And that was actually quite a bit of work by the whole group to find examples and show kind of what that resulted in. And then actually figured out how we can fit this together into some sort of minimal set of data elements to use. Next. So we build off of, for what we're doing, we build off of the dataset catalog, mostly for inspiration, but we directly reuse terms from the Dublin Core metadata terms and the W3C provenance ontology. We also, where appropriate, either take inspiration or actual properties from schema.org. We prefer to reuse where possible, but we also want to make sure that what we're doing with what we can actually do work with is sensible together. So in some cases we kind of reimagine, we adopt terms, but without actually re-adopting the actual elements. Next, please. So these are a set of metadata elements that we started off with. And sorry, I'm noticing the questions as I go, and I will address those at the end. These were identified by the paper from Alper et al. 2021, which actually Rachel just posted the paper for a little while ago. And so we basically went through and used this as the basis for trying to kind of figure out what the what's the maximalist set of metadata that we would find important. And then we went through and actually tried to find examples that might need some of these things. Next. Oh yeah, so we were actually able to come up with these examples, which you can kind of sort of see under the description, but we took those data elements from each FAIR principle, turned them into columns, and we tried to fill out those rows for many different kinds of things. So this actually one you can barely see if you squint is Uniprot, which is a proteins database. And because I'm the bioinformaticist of the group, I went through and tried to fill that out and came up with essentially a set of standards around that. We tried to figure out how to determine what was actually relevant and codable and how we would go about representing it. And we also had to reduce the scope because there's just a lot. Yes, there we go. And so as you can see, even within findability that we see here, that's kind of where things start. That's a lot of that's a lot to work with. And we tried to really build off of this and try to figure out how we were going to go from there. And so we mostly focused, like I said, on findability and accessibility, and really around structure. How do we describe the resources, structure of the resources? Okay, next. So essentially, we really found that there were a set of really important things that we need to deal with, names and identifiers, types, the subject matter, the domain format, and how do you get to it, what the access URL is, how it relates to other knowledge, and so forth. And so we've tried to focus on these commonalities rather than on having everything for every kind of CBK. Since this is an extensible format, this is building off of the semantic web. Other people can obviously add additional knowledge to their CBK if they have the representations for it, they can just go ahead and use that. But in the meantime, we wanted to have like a baseline, the stuff that was so boring that it's not even worth really arguing about, and just come up with a recommendation for how we can get to a place of consensus around this. Next slide. Oh, did we skip one? Yeah, we did. So from the bioinformatics world, again, we had this idea of minimum information profiles, and we've essentially identified 3 minimum information profiles that were very important to describing CBK or to describing CBK. We kind of distinguish between resources and artifacts. Resources tend to be larger scale, like whole databases, or an entire ontology, or a collection, maybe a collection of things, or representations over like a common knowledge over many different representations. And so we have to, and artifacts are like files or endpoints or APIs. And so they're very like concrete and specific, whereas resources tend to be more abstract. So we identified MIDCUR, minimum information to describe a knowledge resource. And this mostly focuses, as you'll see, on the Dublin core structure. MISCUR, minimum information to structure a knowledge resource. One thing that we discovered as we were exploring these different knowledge resources is that they're complex. There are lots of different ways of describing the same knowledge, and it can be parts and wholes, and different representations, different versions. And MISCUR kind of tries to address all of those issues with that. And it's probably going to be the one that is going to look weirdest to people, but we can get into that. And then MIACA, minimum information to access a knowledge artifact. So knowledge artifacts, like I said, are specific files, URLs, resources, or files, URLs, APIs, endpoints that actually allow you to get to a piece of CBK. And so, ultimately it comes down to going to a URL and downloading a file, or going to a URL and accessing an API, or. And so MIACA provides that structure. Next, please. So the first one, MIDCUR, is, and actually to try to slot in Christy's question about whether or not CBKMM has been mapped to the DataCite data model. To the degree to which DataCite builds on the Dublin core metadata terms, yes, it is mapped over. The degree to which they differ, we haven't done that. But one of the great things about these standards is that because we are building off of something that's already been well established and mapped, this maps into things that already exist very strongly without having to even know about it or to specifically reference it. We should do analysis to see how well they overlap, but I believe if DataCite is using, and from what I remember, if it's building off of DOIs, it probably uses Dublin Core quite a bit, because DOI itself uses Dublin Core for its metadata. All of the terms in here, all of the elements, license, rights, subject, creator, publisher, title, description, issued, modified, those are all borrowed wholesale from Dublin Core. And so the idea is that this is a core set that we think is important to talk about, and was a core set that was needed in order to provide to realize the use cases that we were looking at. Next slide. The next one is complicated enough where it warrants an example. I know it's SCOS, and that is not biomedical knowledge per se, but SCOS is a kind of a form of SCOS itself, in addition to representing knowledge, is also itself knowledge, in that it is a vocabulary, and essentially we have different ways of structuring how these things relate to each other. Part of, subset, revision of, and this concretizes thing, which lets us relate different representations. For instance, if you have a vocabulary expressed in XML versus HTML, you have a data set in two formats, that lets us kind of link those together. And I'm going to roll through this a little bit quicker because we seem to be shortening on time. Next. Finally, access. This is probably one of the simpler ones. Knowledge resources of landing pages. Knowledge artifacts have obviously media types, and then either for APIs and endpoint URLs, and for files, download URLs. And basically through mixing and matching this together, we can actually structure a CBK knowledge resource into its knowledge artifacts. Next page. Well, this looks scary, I know. Nobody panic. This is actual RDF. I won't go into it too much, but what this is there's this thing called shapes constraint language, or shackle, that we were able to basically express the minimum information types as. And as a result, we can validate publications of CBK metadata, and also generate forms from it. And so this form actually only came from the formal definition of Midker, Misker, and Miyaka, and it in turn lets us build that out. And this top piece is Midker, the middle one is Misker, and the bottom one is Miyaka. And as you fill out this kind of nested structure, you actually get the ability to provide more information about access, about further details about how to structure your resource, and so forth. And as Rachel posted, we have this actually available as a very techie, I know, demo online. You can go to my GitHub pages page for it and play around with it, or just actually publish some draft CBK. Next slide. We are trying to follow as best we can the working group methods from W3C as inspiration. We have a working group. We have kind of a charter of sorts that we kind of presented to the steering committee. We are, as we build out this structure, we are looking for further proposals for expanding the representation, especially if we can look at how the what we're missing, and either raising issues about that or providing ideas about how we can do that. Currently, we've been working on a consensus model. We haven't had to hold many votes because we haven't had a whole lot of contention, but as we grow bigger, I hope to hear actually more disagreement with us, and get some other people in with strong opinions about how this should work, because I don't want to be the only one who's kind of on the technical side to do that. And most importantly, we are going to be writing a lot more documentation, working examples for this. So we're looking for people to help us with those things. So next slide. The nice thing about this is that because this is based off of essentially the same approach that Google is using for providing metadata about other resources on the web, it's actually very easy to do this using some existing tooling. SEO is kind of really latched on to this sort of knowledge-based metadata on the web, and so there are a lot of tools and resources out there for it. We can actually build an index from just people publishing these files on the web using the Common Crawl search index. And then once we have that, we can do search and filtering of CBK and try to and basically build out kind of aggregation catalog resources using that. And then we'll actually be able to identify how to access and use the knowledge that's been published. Next slide. So we're looking for more examples. We want things that will break this model. If you looked at that and said, that looks way too simple, we would like to see where this model breaks. And so if you have examples of CBK metadata that you feel would not fit, we'll help you make an honest go of it, and then we can identify the shortcomings and we can try to address that. We really want to build out this as a consensus model for knowledge metadata, and build out the tooling and community to do this. So we're looking to expand the work group. We're looking to increase governance outside of the people who are currently most interested in it, and really kind of increase the engagement. Next slide. And so we have, so we're looking for more participants and implementers, and we're gonna have a working session later today. We can talk about this. I talked about this already a little bit in the previous slide. So if we go to the next slide. And so it's just a quick thanks to the whole team, and we have a bunch of people who were involved in this, and either as liaisons or directly on the team, and yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. I think Nor just put in the chat, since we're a little behind on time, we can take one question or comment, and then wrap up, push those questions and comments to the 4 o'clock session.
Yeah, so I think Christy does confirm the mapping to Dublin Core. So unless there's a follow-up to that, I didn't notice any other questions.
Perfect. Well, that was a great overview, and we'll tell folks by design that spreadsheet was meant to be very small because there's so many different types of CBK examples, and it's quite a complicated project, but we have a lot of great discussions, and we really need people to come in and help us see how this works. And we need people to argue with Jamie a little bit more in our meetings, right? So thanks for giving that summary. And Christy, thanks for your patience. We'll turn back to you for that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. And thanks again for this tremendous discussion about the metadata model. I think this is a crowd that understands the importance of good metadata. And so it's really a treat to get to see the work that you've been up to. And I know everyone's looking forward to the discussions that will happen during the technical standards working group meeting. So thank you very, very much for that. And with that, I'm going to welcome Dr. Doug Van Houweling to the meeting to give some remarks on MCBK NA North American governance. Dr. Van Houweling is a professor emeritus of information in the University of Michigan School of Information and a professor emeritus in the Service of Learning Health Sciences at the University of Michigan Medical School. He's had a long career in higher education, information technology leadership and management, and has led the information technology function at Cornell University, Carnegie Mellon, and the University of Michigan. So he's been very busy over the years. He has also led in the development and deployment of advanced network infrastructure for higher education and research, first with the NSF Net project and then leading Internet 2. And so with that, I welcome Dr. Van Houweling.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you here this afternoon. We have can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. We have we've had a great meeting so far, and what that's reinforced for me, of course, is that we need to make sure we have a solid foundation for the continuation of our work together. We are now at a point in the development of the movement that we need to think seriously about how we wish to establish a structure which will provide us with a governance foundation for the movement going forward. As many of you know, this movement has been hosted at the University of Michigan over the last several years. And I believe that it would be useful for Chuck Friedman to give us a review of the history of how the movement is developed. Chuck, are you available?
Thanks, Doug. Do you want the 1 minute version, the 1 hour version, the 1 week version?
I think we need about a 5 minute version.
Okay. So the MCBK's first meeting was a invitational meeting that took place in 2017, just to see if this idea had legs. And it passed that test, and this led to a series of public meetings and the evolution of a set of 3 working groups that you've already heard about one of them today, and you'll be hearing about 2 more, and then we're going to have the working group meetings in just a little bit to close the 2-day event. I have been honored to be able to employ resources at my disposal as chair of the Department of Learning Health Sciences here at Michigan, to be able to underwrite to a limited but I think important extent the activities of the movement, and I think this has paid significant dividends in terms of what we were able to do. The governance of the movement, such as it has been, has been by intention somewhat loose and informal. We have had a steering committee that has served us very well over these years to help shape the movement and the directions it has taken. With the advent of the now multinational or even global MCBK, we have a new organizational structure consisting of chapters, which may take the form of continental chapters, such as the North American one we have here, or national chapters, such as the one that has evolved in the UK and may evolve in other countries. With the formation of a chapter in North America, we need to think about what kind of governance, as Doug just said, and what kind of home, as Doug just implied, the MCBK movement should be, how formal an organization it should be. MCBK can probably, let me start that sentence again. My 10-year term as chair of the Department of Learning Health Sciences comes to an end in a few months, and I will lose control of the resources that we have put to use to support MCBK. We can probably go on with the University of Michigan as the host of this for another year or so for sure, and maybe longer than that. This will depend upon my successor, but I don't believe it's in the best interest of the long-term sustainability of the MCBK North America movement to count on any one institution to underwrite it in the way that my department has been honored to do for the past 6 or 7 years. So that brings us to the place that we are today. And Doug, if there was anything else that you wanted me to say, tell me what you want me to say, and I'll say it.
No, I think that was that I think laid out the current opportunity for us rather well. And so fundamentally, where we are now is we need to think about, first of all, why we have MCBK and what value we derive from it. And then we need to think a little bit about what kind of an organization we want to be, whether we want to be a stand on our own feet organization, or whether we want to seek out partners and be use that as a way of finding a organizational home. And of course, there's the issue of resources. As Chuck pointed out, the University of Michigan has been able to sort of be the launch resource for MCBK. The most important resource, of course, has been all of you and all the work you've done. But it does take a staff, and if we wish to engage in a more extensive program, we actually need a larger staff. So we need to think about the resources that we would be able to garner. And that leads us to the issue of membership and dues. So what we would like to do is do a brief poll of the attendees on these issues and get your initial impressions. I know you haven't had a lot of time to think about this, but the guidance you can give us just based on your own thoughts and impressions, and based, frankly, on what you've seen going on in the North American chapter as represented by this meeting, and what you think about its future, should guide you in responding to the poll. So if we could have the poll put up, I think that would be useful.
Yeah, so there are 5 questions and we're going to be starting with the first one that just got posted.
So you can pick more than one of these if you wish, of course. There are, of course, other things that we might want to choose as activities. And at the end of this session, you obviously will have an opportunity to provide other thoughts and suggestions in the chat.
We currently have a 60% response rate. You know, just we'll keep this open for maybe like 10 more seconds just to get a few more answers in. All right. And so looks like Janelle is sharing the results of those on screen with you.
I think the interesting thing about this is that there appears to be pretty broad support for the full set of activities, which of course means that thinking about governance is quite important if we're actually going to pursue the kinds of objectives that you folks have indicated that you have interest in.
Okay, we'll move on to the second question because there are quite a few questions that Doug wants to get everyone's input on. So we'll launch that second one now.
So one of the issues that we've thought about is, and the example from the UK chapter lends some additional weight to this, is whether we should continue to think of MCBK as a movement on its own bottom, or whether we should try to affiliate with some other potentially larger organization that we would become a part of. Of course, there are pros and cons of doing either. And I think you can all imagine in your own way what they are. So we thought it was important to at least get your thoughts on the direction we should take here.
We have almost 40% participation so far. Let's try to bump that up. And we will close this poll in 10 seconds.
Fascinating. We'll have to come back to this issue and discuss what especially attractive established organizations we might think about with regard to affiliation. Thank you very much for your response here.
Okay, let's move on to the third question.
I think we would need perhaps to have think about member dues, even if we were affiliated with another organization, partly because we would want to have some source of resources so we can pursue the kinds of objectives we talked about earlier, rather than just drawing on the affiliate organization's resources. But that obviously is a question that's up to you and to an organization that we might affiliate with.
We have 53% participation. Hopefully we can get a few more people in the next 10 seconds.
View this as a vote of confidence that we need to move forward with some vigor.
Okay, and let's move to the fourth question.
So we've thought a bit about this, whether or not we should have individual memberships, whether we should be open to membership from various not-for-profit organizations, universities, corporations, for-profit organizations, and government agencies. All of these types of potential members could be related to the objectives of MCBK.
We have 46% participation, and yeah, as I think some people are noting, it might have been helpful to have multiple choices here.
Yes,
or
I
all of
think
the
so.
above. All right, we'll leave this open for another 10 seconds just to get a few more responses in.
Forcing the question to be single answer, this provides an interesting notion about where you think the greatest potential is. I appreciate this.
And lastly, question 5. I think that should come up soon.
So here's the money question, right? I want to say that we've had a lot of help on this discussion with a subcommittee of the steering committee that's been thinking about the governance issues now for a while, and that we had thought that we would pursue this issue a couple of years ago, but frankly, the pandemic interrupted our ability to sort of begin pulling this all together. So we very much appreciate your willingness to think about this now, and we'll obviously, based on these answers and the work of the steering committee and the governance subcommittee, be back in touch with the membership about all this. please don't hesitate to enter any of your thoughts in the chat so that we get some more open-ended response to these issues as we proceed in thinking about governance. I think that pretty much wraps up this section of our meeting. We didn't want to take a long time diving into details until we had a little better sense of the community, and I appreciate very much your willingness to provide us with feedback. Thank you.
And Doug, thank you. That's been really important. This is a really important topic to tackle. Thank you for walking us through. Thanks to Chuck for the history of the MCBK and laying out where we currently stand. The results, I think, are fascinating, and I'm looking forward to getting your further takeaways after you've been able to digest these findings, Doug. And I'm sure more is to come.
Yes.
Well, with that, we're going to take a break. I see that we're a little bit over, so we will take a 10-minute break and come back, and then we'll have report outs from our working groups, or the other two working groups, and then we'll dive into the work groups themselves for a little bit more into the afternoon, and then at the end of the day, wrap up by 5 Eastern. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, I think we are at the 3:40 p.m. Eastern mark, and we can regather. So welcome back. We'll now go into updates from two of the MCBK NA work groups, and then give you the opportunity to join one of the three work groups in further conversation in a breakout room. We'll start with the Trust and Policy work group, which I co-lead with Anthony Solomonides. Dr. Solomonides is the program director for outcomes research and biomedical informatics at Endeavor Health. Hi, Tony, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you. Yes, can you hear me?
I can indeed. I hope you're enjoying yourself.
It's been a great meeting. It's been absolutely amazing.
Fantastic. So glad to hear it. I totally agree. Well, shall we dive in and give a quick update on what we've been up to over this past year?
Sure, please lead.
Okay. I think I don't know. I gather I have the slides that I can show. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll just need 1 second. Okay. I trust you can see my screen, Tony.
Yes.
Wonderful. So the Trust and Policy Working Group, our charter is fivefold: to understand the current CBK landscape as it relates to trust, governance of CBK, and policies for CBK, identify roles and opportunities in the community for promoting transparency and trust, define attributes of and potentially develop prototypes for CBK, what we've been terming product information labels that could promote transparency of trust. You may have heard a lot of this going on in terms of the work of explainable AI, for example, and having something akin to what you see on as a food label, but only having it applied to computable biomedical knowledge so that it can promote transparency and therefore trust. I digress. Fourth bullet, develop model governance structures. And lastly, make recommendations for measuring and evaluating trust and transparency of CBK artifacts, implementation, and evaluation. So we would, in the past year, it took on, executed on a number of different areas of these parts of the charter. And we'll just very quickly go through some of those activities that we conducted last year. You've already heard from Dr. McCusker and Dr. Richardson about the work that they've been doing around the CBKMM. Jamie presented to our group early last year and some of the nascent efforts at that time and considerations around the CBKMM. And so it was a really great conversation that we had, that she had with us in the TMP group, and presenting the outcomes the outcomes from the technical standards and infrastructure discussions that articulated the principles necessary to support a technical infrastructure for applying CBK at scale, and thereby a larger learning cycle infrastructure. And I think this has really laid the groundwork for what we saw, the great efforts that have gone on since this over the course of 2023 and into 2024. And along with Tony and others, we discussed ways in which governance might have a role in the makeup of a CBKMM, considering what might be or what might go into a charter, or an SOP, or a RACI chart. What could help the CBKMM effort achieve its goals while not being too interruptive in its development, and looking at other governance structures like from W3C as a reference to mirror. And I think was already may have already been mentioned, this the great work that Doctors McCusker and Richardson are leading led to a poster that we presented in 2023 at the American Medical Informatics Association. We also engaged in conversations around developing a CBK nutrition label to increase transparency of how knowledge is or has been created and maintained in order to promote trust among multiple stakeholders. maybe enable effective regulation of knowledge and better protect intellectual property. There's been some efforts in these in the press. You may have seen about efforts around a nutrition label in the White House's executive order and blueprint for AI. Ideas around nutrition label and making data and knowledge more transparent. This work has been done in looking at data sets. This is an example of one such effort from the Data Nutrition Project, in which nutrition-like labels are being made available through labels that describe data sets. And work has been published. In this case, Sendak et al. Has been looking at ways in which to promote transparency of AI models, what they call a model facts label. So we've had some very interesting conversations in the TNP group around that last year. Tony, we also, as you know, hosted Dr. Robert Reed, who presented experiences and at Trillium Health Partners in Toronto, Canada, in looking at managing tensions within the learning health system. I don't know if you remember this presentation. I thought it was a really fantastic look into the experiences there and thinking about tensions within a learning health system and how they go about managing and these springs that different tensions at different elements around data systems, ethical oversight, sustainability, technology, and more. And how as an organization they're continually having to monitor and manage these different tensions throughout the system. I thought it was a very powerful
This is
metaphor.
so evocative, yeah.
Yeah, did you, we talked about trust and the dimensions of trust in the LHS movement, thinking about research evidence, care providers and health systems, and really trust by whom. And there was a lot of conversation and I think lessons learned around engaging patient populations. We also had the opportunity at the end of last year to meet with the Trust and Policy Work Group of MCBK UK. And we learned a lot about what they've been up to, just as we as a community learned from Philip Scott's great update yesterday. So I think our small but mighty Trust and Policy Working Group achieved in ways the aspects of the charter. So understanding the landscape, the Reed presentation did that, identifying roles and opportunities for promoting transparency and trust. I think our partnership with the CBKMM initiative has done that. Defining attributes and potentially developing prototypes for product information labels. We've engaged in conversations around that. Developing model governance structures. Again, I think the CBKMM initiative begins to open up some doors there and thinking about how we might apply trust and policy principles to CBK. And I think we still, a TBD, is making recommendations for measuring and evaluating trust and transparency. We continue to meet on a monthly basis, and all are welcome to join. We meet for an hour on the third Wednesday of each month from 12 to 1 Eastern. We value ideas around discussion, presentation, and any joint efforts that you may see. So please feel free to reach out to Tony or myself. If you have ideas, if you have questions about the working group, would love to hear from you and get feedback. Tony, do you have, I'd love to hear your thoughts and observations about what we achieved over the last year.
Yeah, I was going to add that we very much welcome presenters to our work group sessions. So something that has been a thread throughout these 2 days is the relationship between CBK and AI. And that speaks very much to to my interests. As you know, I've spent the last 3 to 4 years working on a number of fronts on AI governance. I'll be happy to say a little bit about that, perhaps in a separate room in a few minutes. But I've been thinking for some time that these two sides of my life, so to speak, have been running in parallel and needed to speak to each other. And AI governance and CBK governance share a lot of concerns. And the thought that, in fact, modern AI can be used to generate CBK and indeed can in some ways be CBK is one that deserves to follow through and bringing the analysis together. That's something that I really would very much like to collaborate with others on.
Well, we welcome all to join us in the breakout session for the Trust and Policy Working Group. Tony has prepared some really cool slides around his thinking of AI and its application, applications in the arena of trust and policy. And so feel free to please do join us if this is an area of MCBK that interests you. If I may, Tony, I think maybe now we pivot to our next working group for our report out.
Yes, that's not sealed. Yeah.
Okay. So next up is to hear from those in the trust and policy work. The HEAL work group, and our co-chairs there, Terry Wheeler and Josh Rubin. The Health Equity and Access to Learning work group is chaired by both Terry and Josh. Terry is the library director at Weill Cornell Medicine, and Josh Rubin is the program officer for Learning Health System Initiatives at the University of Michigan and the president of the Learning Health Community. They have been part of the MCBK community since the beginning and are doing great work to further engage medical librarians and focus on health equity. With that, Terry and Josh, might I hand it over to you to hear about the great work that you've been up to?
Sure, Josh. Thanks very much. I think Noor is going to be sharing our slide deck. Thank you, Noor. So we wanted to just make you aware of this working group. We've been doing a lot of work over the last year. So Noor, you want to move to the next slide? So I want to acknowledge not only have Josh and I been leading this, but we actually took this over from Jerry Perry, who retired in April of this year, I think, or I'm sorry, October of last year. But not long ago, let me say that, not long ago, I went out for his retirement celebration, but he still remains with us. He's very active in the community. And he has a lot of ideas, and you'll see some of his ideas that have come to fruition through his last couple of years and ideas that he's continuing to develop as he continues to participate in this work group. So that's why we include him as our emeritus leader. Okay, next slide. So we renamed ourselves. If you've been in the MCBK community for a while, you've known this group called Sustainability and Inclusion, and that was us. It was Josh actually that came up with this brilliant new acronym, HEAL, that stands for Health Equity and Access to Learning. And it does continue the health equity aspects of the sustainability and inclusion work that we were doing prior. But it really focuses more on health equity and on access to learning. Some of the work that we've done under Deborah Swain's leadership in this work group is creating open source curriculum for MCBK. And so that's a way that we were making learning about MCBK accessible through open access learning. And then we've been working together to collectively advance the shared core value that every decision affecting the health of individuals and populations should be informed by the best available knowledge and made widely accessible. The next slide. So some of the things that we've been up to in this past year, we spent a lot of time and effort developing this call to action article, which will be published in April of 2024 in the Journal of the Medical Library Association. And what we had hoped to do with this article was target librarians and information science professionals or people in the health informatics communities to engage more with MCBK. And so we kind of we described the challenges that MCBK is facing, the challenges that we're seeing with just, with AI in general, and how do we determine that the algorithms used are unbiased? And that's really been a focus of our work for the last year or two or three, because that was even something that we've addressed a couple of years ago under Chris Dimick's leadership. So we're continuing that path forward. We're also engaging in community building with the National Health System in England. And we've been working with librarians across the pond around health equity issues for about a year now. And that's been a great collaboration. And it really was seeded here in MCBK. So we're very thankful that we were able to reach out to these fellow colleagues and connect with them. And they're doing some great community work, and we're doing similar. So we're sharing best practices. And then we're planning a health equity special issue of the Learning Health Systems Journal in 2025. And so we're really looking forward to, furthering the collaboration, for example, with our European partners or our National Health System partners by having one of them be a co-editor in this new model. So we are looking forward to that. And then, opening up the issue to really discuss health equity issues in learning health systems. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Josh. He wanted to talk about how our charge connects to the MCBK manifesto.
Sure. Although in the interest of equity, I'm going to try to, equity meaning fairness. I'm going to try to shorten what I say so that we can have everyone gets more time in the breakout groups instead of just listening to me. But yeah, the big point, I mean, really, when we were working on this manifesto, all of us together and lots of other people in 2018 or so, this whole idea was it was really important that, everyone making decisions got access to the knowledge they needed. And on the flip side, people generating the knowledge had a fair chance of getting that knowledge out to the people that would use it to make decisions. So the generators of the knowledge, are treated fairly, and it's not some is prioritized over others based on anything other than how good, how relevant, how scientifically valid the knowledge is, and then people have access to using it. So that really was a key principle in how this and how we're gonna sort of manifest this equity. I know, equity has become in some ways a loaded word in the context of DEI, which has its opponents and has some big detractors. And so, our thinking on equity in this context is really just fairness is how do we make healthcare, how do we improve health outcomes for everyone, and how does everyone get the knowledge in their hands to be able to make better decisions. So that's where we are going with this. On the next slide, I just started to show some of the many things that are driving how we think about it. We've looked at calls to integrate equity into research training. There was also in our Journal of Learning Health Systems the health equity, the PEDAL framework by my colleague Danielle Brooks. this theme has loomed large around different summaries of the meetings over the years. Rachel Richardson and Noor Khan and others have sort of taken leads on different versions of those over time. And just really, this is a the goal is the knowledge is to be shared, is to be put into action to save lives. As Chuck always talks about mass action. But it comes down to the people again. This is for those of you familiar with Chuck Friedman's fundamental theorem of biomedical informatics. It's not that the AI is going to be doing all the thinking for us. It's that it's going to help people process lots and lots of information. And I know, yesterday we were talking about self-driving Teslas for a little bit, and I remember an event we organized 8 years ago where there was a talk about self-driving Teslas and learning systems, and maybe by the year 2020 they were going to be fully self-driving because they were learning so well. And the answer is it's about putting people in the driver's seat. The AI is there to help, but it's putting people in the driver's seat and getting them there safely. So that's where we're going. In the interest of time, I'll move on back to Terry in the next slide.
So this just recognizes some organizational changes that we've had, the name change, and also our leadership transitions. And then the next slide. So we want to, what we have upcoming in the next year is, of course, the article I just mentioned, our continued collaboration with the National Health System librarians. We're hoping to introduce MCBK to various Medical Library Association caucuses. And then we're planning to co-edit the health equity special issue. And that's that. I think that's all. Thank you very much. We hope you'll join us in our work group to further discuss some of these articles. And we did a survey to see what our projects should be for the next year. And we would love to have you inform us about how we've done and where we could continue to grow. Thank you.
Almost back to on time.
That's right. And Terry and Josh, thank you so much. It's exciting to see all the great work that you have underway. Congratulations.
And thank the work group members. I mean, it's been such an amazing team effort.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you. Well, with that, we have now heard from each of the 3 working groups today: the Standards and Infrastructure, Trust and Policy, and HEAL. Now that we've heard from all 3, you have the opportunity to learn more and get involved in active projects by joining one of them in the breakout rooms. Breakout 1, let's see, Trust and Policy. Breakout 2, HEAL, and Breakout 3, Technical Standards and Infrastructure. We will gather until 10 to 5 p.m. Eastern, so 4:50 p.m. Eastern, and then circle back here in the main room for a brief summary of the event and next steps to come for the MCBK community.